Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Some serious rumours emerging today that despite a solid start to the season with Ferrari, apparently Lewis Hamilton is seriously considering his future in the sport in the immediate term. Ferrari 2027 could be a different story, but after looking into some of these rumours and where they're coming from, it doesn't appear especially clear there is truth behind them. What do you think that Hamilton will go on to do? Hamilton, trade your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. A few updates we're going to go through today, one of which is this: Max Verstappen is leading the way because we know he wants to race another series. He's going to do the Le Mans or the Nürburgring 24 hours. Le Mans is in his future as well at some point. And Antonelli says, you know what, sure, I'll go and get my permit as well. Maybe I can go race with Max. So I'm sure that Toto Wolff is saying, absolutely not, Kimmy. There is no way. Look, if it's Max, you've won all the championships. If Max wants to race in whatever series, what are Red Bull going to tell him, right? As much as Juan Pablo Montoya might not be so keen with Max going and driving in other series, of course, Red Bull can't say, you can't do that, Max, because he's just going to leave and go somewhere where he can. And Mercedes, though, with Antonelli, it'd be a different story, right? It's the same reason why the drivers, you have to have had like 7 years in Formula 1 before they allow you to go skiing. That's just the rule nowadays. Like Antonelli, I don't know if he goes skiing, but I don't think he will, let's be honest, because George Russell, I'm pretty sure I saw him for the first time in a ski jacket like last year. And Hamilton does what he wants. The top drivers do what they want, but the teams protect their drivers, understandably so. And unless you are very experienced and kind of have a little bit of sway in the team, then you don't get that freedom necessarily. The drivers can kind of do what they want at some level. Lance Stroll fractured his hand, didn't he, falling off a bike at one point? You know how it goes. But Antonelli says, yeah, maybe I'll get my permit for the Nürburgring. I'll make that happen by the end of the year. Look, maybe he does some racing there in the off-season. I do not think there is any world where Mercedes are letting Antonelli run loose and have fun in other series middle of the season. Certainly not until he's at least got a couple of championships under his belt for that team. Maybe that'll happen in the next couple of years. Just another quick update. We know that Honda are cooked, their engine is terrible, and it has now been confirmed. It's actually not just 10% worse, it's actually also 8% worse. So this is all going to become clear after Canada. So the Montreal Grand Prix happens, then the FIA test all the engines, and based on where the Mercedes, which we think is the best, sits compared to the others, then we decide the Aduo benefits the other teams will get. They've created a new category just for Honda, and that is from 6, 8, 10%. They get more money. It's a bit of a mess. Williams, though, have the Mercedes engines and nothing expected there. They have had an underwhelming is probably even an understatement compared to the expectations that Williams had. After a double podium double podium isn't the right way to put it, but after 2 podiums last season with Carlos Sainz and promising developments over the last couple of years, and James Vowles saying this was the year, it's all about 2026, we don't care about 2024, we don't care about 2025, it's all about 2026. If it wasn't for Aston Martin and Honda stinking up the joint, Williams would be getting a lot more criticism than they have. Look, to their credit, they got some points on the board in Miami. They did finish the race in the point-scoring positions, but arguably, again, helped by a couple of DNFs in there. The pace was not especially impressive. We know that the car has been overweight and it's getting slightly lighter, but it's still not enough because they passed the crash test only because they beefed up the car further than they would like. So it still has shown this season they're not where a top team would be, and can Williams fight back? They've got a big upgrade on the way. That's the plan anyway, but it's not just Mercedes, or it's not just Williams, is it? It's Mercedes, it's Audi, it's Haas, also McLaren as well, but in terms of Williams competitors, let's just say Audi and Haas have updates in Montreal expected as well. So let's see how Williams go. But their start of the season hasn't been great, and I do wonder what it would mean for somebody like Carlos Sainz, especially because we're about to discuss this Hamilton, Ferrari stuff. I don't think Sainz is going back to Ferrari. I don't see how that makes sense for Ferrari, really. I think, maybe there's a logic in there that Sainz could be a good option if Hamilton decided to call it a day, but I feel like you just call up Ollie Behrman, don't you? That feels like more of the future plan. But look, if Leclerc decided to leave as well or something, then Sainz would be an option. I think for Sainz, obviously, if Ferrari called him back up, he would have a hard time saying no. But I do wonder if Sainz will be thinking as such, if he will be thinking, Williams, we had a good year in 2025, all things considered, but after starting out this regulation cycle poorly and being substantially behind Alpine, and with McLaren and Mercedes just being such dominant forces right now in Formula 1, I mean, Mercedes full stop and then McLaren over the last couple of years, is it really plausible that Williams are in a position to allow Sainz to fight for a championship, right? Like, obviously he had some confidence in the team, but that feels like an uphill battle, and that feels like something that's quite a way away. So I think that Sainz might be looking elsewhere. Not to say that Albon couldn't either, but it's just Sainz would carry more weight in those conversations. As we say with Audi, they do have upgrades on the way themselves. They still have not got great race starts, and that's something that they've got to resolve as well. But look, it's a key focus. They've scored some points at least this season. It's not an absolute disaster. Let's take a look then at the championship standings. If we go further down, you will find Bortoleto with 2 points on the board. Actually, there you guys can just about see it. And the bottom of the list, of course, the Aston Martin drivers, then the Cadillac drivers, then Hulk, Albon, Ocon, Bortoleto, Sainz, Hadjar in 13th in the Red Bull, Lindblad ahead of him at 4 with better average race finishes and all that stuff. Colapinto in 11th place. Then the top 10 is Liam Lawson, who's had kind of a quietly solid start to the season, I think it would be fair to say. Then Gasly just preceded or succeeded, whatever, by Ollie Behrman at 17, who's had, everybody knows, a pretty sensational start to the year. I think the same is true for Gasly. And then it's the usual suspect in the top 7. Verstappen has fought his way up to 7th after a fantastic weekend, at least in terms of pace, at Miami, despite a challenging start to the season. And then we get the top 6. Antonelli leads the way from Russell, Leclerc in 3rd, Norris, the reigning world champion, closing him down in 4th. He's actually tied with Hamilton, but ahead on head-to-head race results. Lando's podium was a 2nd place. Hamilton's podium was a 3rd place. Piastri a little bit further behind as well, but he does have 2 podiums to his name so far this season. So that's the state of the championship. And then it made you wonder, okay, what's going to happen with these Hamilton rumours emerging today? So there was a few tweets that started to do the rounds. Justin, the end of an era could be near. Reports suggest Lewis Hamilton may announce his retirement from Formula 1 at Silverstone, with the 2026 season potentially marking his final chapter in the sport. So look, we'll talk about whether this is actually likely, what Hamilton might be thinking right now, what Ferrari might be thinking right now. But it's worth first of all looking at, okay, where does this actually come from? What is the likelihood that the person who said this has any idea what they're talking about in this context? You know, these are valid things to look into. Ralf Schumacher, who obviously you've always got to take with a pinch of salt, he says that Ferrari should just get rid of Hamilton, bring in Behrman, which is a classic Ralf Schumacher take. But, and look, Ferrari's upgrade worked, just not for Lewis. It's not like Lewis was actually slow in Miami, really. Obviously, in the race wasn't great, but he had massive damage. The sprint qualifying wasn't as good, but actually main qualifying, it looked like he got on top of it more. And Hamilton even himself said the simulator threw him off to a certain extent. He expects that to change when he goes to Canada, of course, a track where historically he has gone very well indeed. But this was the article from F1 Generale here, and it actually comes from a quote from a podcast. So a Dutch journalist, Louis Dekker, who's been around for quite a while. I mean, he's definitely a relatively notable Dutch journalist, not on the, Eric Van Haren levels. He's been around Formula 1. As far as I can tell, I have no reason to believe that he would have any special Ferrari or Hamilton insight. It's like, if this was Eric Van Haren saying it, then presumably he'd heard something from Jos Verstappen or from Max Verstappen or some guys in those camp, right? Because we know that he's very close. Or if this was maybe an Italian journalist close to Ferrari or somebody who has some connections with Hamilton, you'd take it with a little bit more credence. But he said on this podcast, Ferrari is disappointing me. Besides their excellent starts, they're not capable of fighting for victories. They seems to be the team to beat, but McLaren is now ahead again. I'd be willing to bet on it. I think Hamilton will announce his retirement at Silverstone at the end of the season, and his kind of co-host also hypothesized and says he has to make a decision sooner or later, and perhaps he already has. So let's not forget here that Hamilton has, as far as we understand, a 2+1 contract. We believe the option is on both sides. That was at least the rumour. So Ferrari can decide to extend, or Hamilton can decide to extend. So his contract runs until the end of 2027, but it requires an extension on one of the parties. We believe that Hamilton, if he wants to continue, he can. Of course, Ferrari, look, contracts are fickle. If Ferrari decided they wanted to change, if Hamilton, drastically fell off or something, then they wanted to put Behrman in, which seems like the logical next step, let's be honest. That's exactly what they could do if they were to pay Hamilton off like billions of dollars, if we understand the contracts correctly. But this is how the championship standings look so far this season. This journalist suggests that he thinks Hamilton will announce his retirement in Silverstone, which, look, if you are going to announce a retirement, it's kind of a sensible timeline. But will he? Does that make sense? I'm not so convinced, right? Because you look at the way the championship has gone so far. Hamilton, undoubtedly, yes, the last couple of rounds haven't been as strong. Japan, he was slow in race pace, but he outlined that they found something that contributed to that. And in Miami, we didn't really get a clear picture. And it doesn't feel that long ago where China was obviously excellent, especially with respect to Charles Leclerc. But maybe you could equally argue that last year China was an outlier as well. He won the sprints, and then after that, the season wasn't quite the same. But I think there's no doubt that Hamilton does like these cars better than the previous generation. He seems to be more in tune with the way that they need to be driven. Hamilton's been quite clear that he's not a fan of the battery. He's not a fan of the things that the other drivers aren't happy with either, right? So it's not like he's happy with the regulations, but he's not going to leave for the same reason that Verstappen is. Hamilton was quite clear around, Verstappen may not, right? But you know what I mean? If Verstappen was to leave, then it doesn't feel like Hamilton's frustrations are anywhere near to the same extent. And Hamilton even said in China that was like the best racing that he'd ever had. So that's what confuses me about this idea, is that, well, Hamilton seems to be having a pretty good time. Certainly a better time than last season. He's much closer to Leclerc on average. He's, I think, just about half a tenth down, something like that, on average to Leclerc in qualifying so far this season. That's very respectable. And I think Hamilton has, at least in his own opinion, more to come in terms of the simulator work, like not really correlating, which is a problem, of course, for Ferrari. But Hamilton seems more comfortable with these cars. It feels like you can get more out of the late braking. They're also making them slightly more traditional as well with the changes, the move away from the battery. The racing clearly has the potential to be good. The dirty air is relatively low. They're a little bit more agile, a little bit more nimble. So I think Hamilton generally likes that. And of course, he'd also want to deliver success for Ferrari. And there's also some reason to believe that there is optimism in the Ferrari camp. I know that the last couple of rounds haven't been good enough. They would have hoped in Miami to really turn a corner and to make us believe that they could be championship contenders. But the reality is, with the engine deficit, that isn't going to be happening until maybe Belgium, when they bring the new upgrades. And whether they can keep in the picture until then is very much a tall order. But in the immediate term, okay, sure, Ferrari may continue to suffer, but we know that the Agio benefits they're going to get should be pretty substantial. The changes to the regulations, as we discussed yesterday, could even be better for them than their rivals. So, unless his relationship with Kim Kardashian has convinced him just that it's time to leave the sport, which I doubt, then I don't see this personally. Tweet your thoughts in the comments below, but I feel like Hamilton should have enough confidence. Of course, he would have loved to have won this season, but surely 2027 is the one to give it a go, right? And I'm sure Charles Leclerc feels similarly, that this year probably isn't going to happen. Mercedes, maybe McLaren, but Mercedes probably too good. But assuming they get their engine sorted next year, it's very much so all to play for. And there's reason to believe that Hamilton would be confident in these regulations, that he could get the job done in the event of a championship battle. And he still seems to be enjoying himself, and Fernando Alonso hasn't retired yet, which Hamilton will not want to retire before Fernando, that is for sure. So yeah, I don't think there's anything behind these rumours, but intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Just one final thing to go through here I thought was kind of fascinating. The Telegraph put together, Luke Slater here, a top 20 Formula 1 drivers ever. Now, I've actually not looked through this yet, so I'm gonna see it for the first time with you guys here. Again, I will of course admit I am far too young to have seen many of these champions, or maybe non-champions in the case of some, probably in action. So you guys in many cases may well be better informed. But I do think this is always interesting. It's so difficult to do this, so I'm not going to massively criticize or comment really. I'm just going to share what Luke Slater had to say. Graham Hill, number 20, double world champion, and Damon Hill at number 19. So how about, I mean, okay, should Hill, I don't know, what do you guys think? David Hill, 19th best Formula 1 driver of all time, could be generous considered by some. I don't know what you guys think about that. Nico Rosberg, 18th, and yeah, maybe that's about fair. Okay, I'm not going to comment. I'm just going to go through them and see what you guys think. Nelson Piquet, number 17. Mika Hakkinen, just ahead of him. 50th is Fernando Alonso. Interesting, right? So, of course, it's always kind of tough to place Alonso, really. Some might even put him as high as 5th or 6th, just in terms of like pure raw talent. But of course, there's much debate to be had about Alonso's career. So Sterling Moss, we actually talked about Moss the other day as the greatest ever driver to have never won the championship, 14th greatest ever Formula 1 driver. Of course, it's so hard across all these different eras to really put things into context. This to me is quite interesting. Vettel 13th. I think a lot of people have a very similar top 4. And, well, we'll see if we have the same top 4 that we might expect when we get down to it. And by that I mean that a lot of people have said that in some order, Schumacher, Hamilton, Senna and Fangio are top 4. Now, not sure I necessarily agree with that. I think that Jim Clark should be in there, but whatever, we'll see what this author's come up with anyway. But the question was kind of, okay, who's 5th, who's 6th? Could you throw Vettel in there? Because, you know, 4-time consecutive back-to-back world champion, but 13th according to this list. So Jack Brabham in 12th. 11th is Nigel Mansell, which is kind of interesting. It's always fascinating to see this discussion, right? Because I think Mansell does probably deserve to be about here, but obviously only won the 1 championship. Vettel won 4, but does that, you know, is that enough? I don't know. It's obviously a matter for debate. Alberto Ascari in top 10, and then we move into the top 9 with Niki Lauda and number 8. Okay, so Jackie Stewart. So we're getting there at this point, I think. We'll see who they've put in 7th here. Okay, Max Verstappen. Interesting. So, because some would have Max higher. I think it's tough to have Max any higher than probably 5th, but, you know, no doubt Max, one of the greats at this point, absolutely no doubt about that, and we'll see. If he can win another championship, I think then Max will certainly have to move up the list again. And then Alain Prost in 6th. I do think that when I see Prost, I always think that Senna should be closely ranked with Prost. In fact, 5th actually is Senna. So, yeah, I think it's like, some people say, oh, Senna's like the greatest and Prost is kind of like an afterthought. And as I say, I was not born to watch this era, so I stand to be corrected, right? But people say, oh, well, Senna out-qualified Prost 1,000,000 to 1. But like that doesn't really tell the whole story of the era and the setups that Prost would go for. And look, Prost had a different set of strengths to Senna, but I think in many respects they were equally great. So, yeah, Senna at 5th. And then, okay, so Jim Clark. To be fair, I think what I said earlier is probably about right here. So, it's a shame Jim Clark died when he did, because if he didn't, he really could have been, I mean, he already is one of the greats, but I mean, still, if he'd have lived a few more years, wow, he could be top 1 of this list. They've got Hamilton 3rd, they've gone Schumacher 2nd, and then presumably Fangio, right? Yeah, so I guess fair enough. Again, it's always difficult, isn't it? Because if you lived in the 50s, you'd probably say Fangio's the GOAT, no question. But I think a lot of people nowadays would doubt that, right? Because they'd be like, well, you know, this guy was driving against farmers. Like, surely it should be Schumacher or Hamilton or something like that. But anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting to go through. Intrigued to your thoughts, as always, in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.